Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Cricket Unfiltered. I'm Menners, and in the wee hours of yesterday morning, David Warner was presented with a bottle of Grange in a box, signed by his teammates and support staff, acknowledging his retirement. And in the end, it was the end of Australia's T20 World Cup campaign. We're here to wrap it all up. We're also going to touch on some other cricket news because now that Australia's campaign is over, then it's time to look and see what's on the horizon. Joining me for the regular weekly show is Damien Watson, sports broadcaster and regular panelist. Damien, how are you?
I'm good, Menners. Great to be with you again. Hope you're going well. I'm finally over my flu as well, which seems to be going around a bit in Australia at the moment. And look, there's not much that changes within a year or within 12 months, because it was about 12 months ago we were speaking about the spirit of cricket. It was a big debate about it, and it's happening again, Menners.
Oh, we'll get to that, but that was one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen in that Afghanistan-Bangladesh game where Gulbuddin Naib just went down like he'd been sniped from the boundary. But yeah, we're going to get to all that in the podcast. We're going to really dive into Australia's World Cup campaign, look ahead to some cricket news, and there's been a pretty important appointment at domestic level that I'd like to talk to Damien about. But let's start with Australia's World Cup campaign. And Damien, I've had a couple of days now to sort of really let it sort of sink in and sort of try to come up with some reasons or explanations of where it went wrong. And I sort of think when I look back at this tournament, it'll be that maybe it was one cup too many for this group of players, that the T20 side had faltered in the home World Cup 2 years ago. Bailey and co put a lot of faith in an older group, and in the end they didn't deliver. So probably one campaign too many. Is that unfair, Damien?
Oh, look, at the end of the day, I find the T20 format to be the most fickle of them all. You just need one bad performance, Menners, as we saw from the Australians, and your whole campaign goes up in flames. We were thinking the same thing with the One-Day World Cup last year, and they were managing to turn it around after a bad start to that campaign. But with the T20s, you only have to lose your concentration, make a few fielding errors, and things just turn around for the worst, don't they? And you have less time to try and reparate compared to the one-day format. And I think it was just one of those things. That's why when you look at the history of the T20 International World Cup, you see some odd results because, and it's more varied as well, which I think is a good thing for the game of cricket, because as soon as you lose guard, you could pretty much be eliminated.
Yeah, I just still think that was a very disappointing performance from Australia.
It was.
To get walloped by Afghanistan and all those drop catches. I just think it was pretty poor. And, it's something you hearkened there back to was the 50-over World Cup. And one thing what I think did happen was I think that 50-over win did give a few credits in the bank to the T20 side, even though they're vastly different formats. The majority of the players are the same. And I think because of the way they won the 50-over World Cup, they were given a bit more leeway. I wouldn't say there was complacency, but there certainly was a very relaxed sort of atmosphere going into the tournament. And there was, a sort of feeling that they'd done it in the 50-over World Cup and they were going to do it in the T20 World Cup. And in the end, they got it wrong. And I think maybe it was a mistake to blur formats, because the 50-over game is a long way from the 20-over game.
Well, I think it's a combination of a few things. Probably the elements you mentioned are right. You've got to remember they won the 2021 T20 World Cup campaign as well. It wasn't that long ago, less than 3 years ago, of course. So
they absolutely fluffed on the one at home. So it's I think maybe that. Correct. I mean, now we look at the 2021, and that was the nadir of this T20 side, and maybe the selectors just held on too long to this group.
Do you think, though, you mentioned the selection for the international team? I mean, there's so much focus on the domestic format when it comes to T20s and the various competitions and the franchises you have around the world. I mean, in general, there's probably not a huge or a dearth of fixtures when it comes to T20 internationals purely. And then on top of that, you're compounded by the fact that there's probably not much attention directed towards just your general T20 international tournament. And therefore, with the lack of attention, maybe becomes a lack of attention. Maybe I'm not saying lack of attention. They would have done their due diligence, but I think naturally there's not as much scrutiny until you get to a World Cup campaign. And I think that might play a role as well.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, because you don't often get Australia's best T20 side playing in between World Cups because it's often jammed into breaks, so you get most of the players resting. I mean, I think one of the key areas where you can maybe get a sense of why they were complacent is the way the captaincy was treated. And leading Australia in a World Cup as the captain is a privilege, and it is also comes with an enormous amount of pressure. And if I'm not mistaken, Mitch Marsh wasn't really given this captaincy until only a couple of months ago, really, I think was confirmed when the squad was announced. And there was a lot of talk that Pat Cummins was going to be the skipper. So I think it was complacent not to think we needed a captain who was used to leading the side, used to leading the team under pressure, aware of all the tactics. And it backfired. Mitch Marsh dropped a number of catches. He didn't bat well, and he got the tactics wrong. We shouldn't have bowled first against Afghanistan. And so I think maybe the complacency was there, was thinking, we can just stick old Mitch in, a little bit before the World Cup and we'll be fine. And so I think there were little areas, if you look around, where they maybe just dropped the ball a little bit.
Yeah, perhaps. I think there's always that element of we're always ducks of the class with hindsight. Remember, Pat Cummins made a few controversial calls of that 50-over World Cup, which I think the vast majority of the country disagreed with at first, and it turned out okay in the end. I want
an inquisition. I want an inquiry. I want to know why we're not the Triple Crown champions. I mean, that's what Cricket Unfiltered is all about. I want heads on sticks. I want answers.
I see why, and look. Yeah, I think in hindsight, maybe coming in.
But not making the semi-finals 2 T20 World Cups in a row is not good enough.
I agree.
That's not unreasonable, And as I said in my little rant yesterday, we didn't get beaten by a better team on the day. So India did, but Afghanistan, we played well below our best. 5 drop catches in a World Cup game. That just doesn't happen for Australia.
Yeah, I think in any tournament, given where Australia is on the hierarchy, we should always be at least to the semi-final stage.
Exactly.
You can forgive a semi-final loss, but we always should be in the top 3 minutes.
Absolutely, well, top 4, but and it didn't happen in the last 2 World Cups. So Ben Horn wrote an interesting article because people, I get this, I get a lot of flack because everyone thinks I'm anti Andrew McDonald and I'm anti Pat Cummins. No, I'm not anti them, but I do think there are areas any coaching staff can get better. It's like Justin Langer needed to get softer, so he got softer and then they sacked him. Andrew McDonald, maybe he needs to get a little bit harder. And Ben Horn from News Corp wrote about Australia's catching and fielding, that it is a completely different discipline and perhaps some level of complacency is set in. Are players as fit as they should be? Does more pre-match work need to be done to acclimatise to specific grounds? These are questions Australia should be asking themselves, because fielding so poorly in 3 World Cup matches seems more than a blip on the radar. And, that's not me. That's Ben Horn, who's at all the games, and I'm at a lot of the games. And I see, there's not a lot of pre-match warm-ups now. It's very different. And, I don't think it's going to go back to the way it was with Bobby Simpson, where it's 2 hours of fielding before the match. But maybe these questions need to be asked. Have they gone too far the other way?
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, you can probably only make a specific judgment if you see them during the week in the lead up. But I think there should be, and it's the same with any level of cricket, a great amount of focus on fielding. That was the hallmark when Australia... Look, we've had a pretty good era in the last few years, but during that real golden era where we just kept on winning everything in the late 90s into the 2000s, fielding, whilst it didn't get maybe the credence it deserved, that was really the hallmark of why Australia was so powerful for so long. Look at how accurate Ricky Ponting was on such a consistent basis with run-outs. You very rarely saw too many drop catches. We were always the fielding benchmark in the world. I don't know if we can say that about this current crop.
Oh, definitely not. And I think the fielding does sort of shine a light on what may be at the core of the team in this World Cup. And, I think it was a little bit of a pressure thing as well, that they were, so relaxed and things were going so well at the beginning of the tournament. As soon as the fire really got hot, they just weren't quite ready for it. And, yeah. So look, let's look at some of the statistics from the Australians campaign, because it does make for some interesting reading. Travis Head was the leading run scorer for Australia, 255 runs at an average of 42 at a strike rate of 160 with 2 half centuries. And second top scorer was David Warner with 178 runs at a strike rate of almost 140. And then Stoinis made some good contributions. Glenn Maxwell, that one innings against Afghanistan. But Mitch Marsh, only 125 runs at 20. Tim David, 61 runs at 15. Matthew Wade, 27 runs at 13. They didn't really fire at the back end of the tournament when they were really needed.
And you got to remember too, man, as we played against teams like Oman, Scotland, Bangladesh, to me, and that was the effective game with the Duckworth-Lewis system, Namibia as well. To me, the two big tests, well, in the end, the three big tests were against England, Afghanistan, and India, right? That's where the quality was in hindsight. And I suppose Bangladesh is similar level to Afghanistan, but at the same time, that was a Duckworth-Lewis effective match. So I don't put a lot of credence on the results against some of the minnows. So to me, in terms of who really stood up during the tournament, I look at who contributed during those matches against some of the top echelon teams. And look, Travis Head made 34 against England. A good knock. He was really the only one to stand up against India as well. So I don't think you could fault him to a great degree. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned some of those names. Tim David, he made 11 against England, even though the Australians still won. But you go to that match against Afghanistan, and when the pressure was on, certainly the Aussies faltered with the bat as well as in the field, bar Glenn Maxwell. And it was a shocking performance. If it wasn't for Glenn Maxwell, we would have been absolutely humbled. And Travis Head did score a duck, or he didn't score a run at all as well. So that has to be taken into consideration. You give him an out, I suppose, for one bad performance, but yeah, there were a few others there. Tim David, as you mentioned, not consistent at all. Mitch Marsh, likewise. Matthew Wade maybe didn't fire under pressure like I thought he would as well. So, yeah, it was overall pretty disappointing against some of the top echelon teams, maybe bar that game against England is the only exception.
Yeah, Australia kind of limped out of the tournament. They got through the group stage pretty comfortably, but then in the Super 8s, it was a pretty jarring performance. I mean, it's hard to judge players like Wade and David. David only faced 41 balls. Wade only faced 24 balls in the whole tournament. But I guess when we really needed maybe a cameo here or there against Afghanistan or India, we didn't call. Yeah, exactly. Bowling wise, well, Adam Zampa, another stellar World Cup for him, leading wicket taker with 13, an economy of 6.67. That is outstanding. Josh Hazlewood, an economy of 6. He only took 4 wickets, but he just went for basically a runner ball for the whole World Cup. That's pretty incredible. Stoinis took 10 wickets, so you add that to his figures with the bat. He had a pretty handy World Cup, albeit not really performing when we needed him at the end. Yeah, look, I think nothing's really changed in the bowling stocks. I don't think anyone's really advanced or lost in their position. I think everyone feels Stark should have played in that game against Afghanistan. And people say, it was expensive against India, but in the end, he got Sharma out with that Yorker around the wicket. He kept us in the game. Had Mitch Marsh taken that catch off Pandya, maybe we win that game. So I don't know. I would have liked to have seen Stark playing in that game against Afghanistan. But I think probably Zampa's the story again. That's this World Cup, the 50 over World Cup, and the 2021 T20 World Cup win where he's been outstanding.
And he's got that adaptability as well. And you speak of that 50 over World Cup. I remember in the early stages, he probably wasn't going all that well. Even that game against Sri Lanka, which the Australians ended up winning, he was struggling in the early stages of that match before turning things around. So he's got that adaptability, which you need in such quick fashion and swift fashion in the T20 format, which is one of his great attributes. Yeah, Hazelwood was good until the Afghanistan game. He was very expensive there. He conceded 39 runs off his 4 overs. And, yeah, under any circumstance, I know the Afghanistani openers have been pretty good, but to concede 118 in that opening partnership, they just let themselves get away, let the game get away from them, basically, the Aussies.
Yeah. So, yes, that's not pretty reading for Ash Agar. Just 2 matches, but only taking the 1 wicket. Economy of 7, which wasn't too bad. But I think now the big question is, and there's been a lot of discussion around this, is will this team be dramatically overhauled? And Josh Hazelwood made some interesting comments that these World Cups come around pretty quick, every 2 years. And he said there might be a couple of changes, but a lot of the guys, still play franchise cricket if they're not playing for Australia. So they're available to be picked. And, I think, Josh, yeah, and he says, I don't think there'd be anything drastic in terms of team changes. But, okay, so apart from David Warner, who's retired, I think we could see Marcus Stoinis come out of the team, be replaced with Cameron Green and Aaron Hardy. What do you think of that? I think they need to start bringing younger all-rounders.
Yeah, provided they show their wares at domestic level or at franchise level. I think.
Well, Cameron Green has.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. And, there's the
that's a like for like.
Well,
I think Fraser McGurk will come in for Warner, but I think, Cameron Green's a like for like replacement for Stoinis. But,
And probably better form with the ball, even though Stoinis wasn't horrible with the ball or anything like that during the World Cup. Cam Green, I think, showed greater consistency in the lead up with the ball. I think he's starting to find that groove in balancing the 2 roles together as an all-rounder, a genuine all-rounder, but there's still scope for improvement there for him as well. But I tend to agree with those comments before. I don't think you want too many drastic changes. And you've got to remember too, Betters, with the T20 format, and we've seen this at franchise level as well, you can, because it's a shorter format, you can afford to play a little bit longer from an age perspective compared to the grind and the test format. You could disagree with me, but yeah, that's.
I'd like to see a clean out. I'd like to see this team has had 2 chances and they fluffed at them. I'd like to see.
Is that wise though? Coming in when they come around so quickly and so frequently, is it wise to have a dramatic change to the list?
Yeah, and I want to separate the formats here. So there's a 50 over Champions Trophy next year in Pakistan. So I think the 50 over team is different because, then players like Marnus Labuschagne and Steve Smith come back into that team and does look totally different. So just looking at the T20 side, I want a complete clean out. So Stoinis gone. I think Mitch Marsh's captaincy is tenuous, but I think if they really want him to be captain, then say to Mitch, okay, we're going to back you till the next World Cup. He's 32? So we're going to give you a couple of years, form dependent, but, he's got to run at it. So he can build a team to make a real challenge at the next World Cup rather than being, say, hey, here's a team a month before. Glenn Maxwell's an interesting one. He'll be 37 at the next T20 World Cup. He is someone who you could see still being there. Yeah. So even though he's been disappointing in some World Cup campaigns, he still produces those match-winning moments that I think is worth sticking with. I think Tim David's no certainty to be there. I think he's a good finisher, but maybe we've got better finishers available.
Yeah, I tend to agree. He was one of the more disappointing aspects of the Australian side of this campaign. I still have a bit of faith in Glenn Maxwell. I know you mentioned the age aspect, but he still looks pretty fit, doesn't he? I think if anything, it's more the consistency that's his issue. But, gee, there's big times that happened in this campaign as well when things were looking pear-shaped that he's been the A1 to stand up. And we've seen it in the 50 over format as well.
Absolutely. And then I think Matthew Wade will be done now. You'll see Josh Inglis come into that team. Probably a good thing, even though I love Matty Wade. I think his time has passed. Adam Zampa still a lock in the white ball team, so that's fine. Ash Agar, I think his time has passed. I think it'll be time for younger spinners like Tanvi Sanger and up-and-coming spinners we're seeing in the BBL. And then there'll be a decision for the fast bowlers. Will Hazelwood, Cummins and Stark be at the next T20 World Cup? And if they're not going to be there, maybe it's time for some of them, it won't be all of them, but maybe, Stark, who's a bit older, might decide to focus on Test cricket and 50 over cricket and leave international T20 cricket. But, I'd like to see, at least half the side, revamped.
It'll be interesting to see what happens with those older players, how they manage their loads. I mean, you could make the argument that it's the most jam-packed it's ever been with the 3 formats, right? For a fast bowler in particular, the emphasis on fitness and everything like that. So I do wonder how they're going to manage their time, because eventually they're going to have to drop their load to a degree if they want to maintain consistent performance for a long period of time. And you do wonder whether they're going to keep going at international level in the T20s, because the prestige, whether you like it or not, at international level is still with the Test format, and maybe to a certain one day it's probably gone out the door, bar the World Cup. And whether they just keep going with the domestic T20 level, because that's where the money is.
Yeah, I mean, I think they'll definitely want to cash in, especially play in those tournaments like the Major League Cricket and stuff. But yeah, I think it's incumbent on the selectors to make some tough decisions and use the T20 side to get some young, exciting fast bowlers into the international scene.
I think you still want to maintain a semblance of experience, though. I think it's good to have that.
I think there's enough there. But they had their chance. I mean, well, they stuffed it. They stuffed the World Cup in Australia. They stuffed this one. Bad luck. Like, I think, you've got to move on. I think you absolutely have to move on and build a new team, a young, dynamic team, before it's too late, because we aged out in this World Cup, and you don't want to be caught. You don't want to be caught short, in a couple of years' time, where you're scrambling for players before the tournament because you've maybe held on too long.
Yeah, but maybe bar a couple of cases, you can make a decent argument for a lot of those players for their selection to be justified. That's the thing. I suppose you've got to make that call now as to whether to maintain it now there's been another failure, but I don't necessarily, maybe bar the whole Fraser McGurk debate, a lot of the appointments I didn't necessarily mind to the squad. Yeah,
but like Stoinis will be a couple of years older. He's already fading. Wade will be way too old. And then the quicks, you just never know.
Yeah,
Mitchell Stark.
Injury could happen. That's the thing.
Some of them have, talked about the Ashes at home, not this summer, but the summer after, as being the end of their career. So, yeah, I think they've got to be aware that they need to definitely start getting players like Nathan Ellis, who what we saw was really good, and Joe Richardson and Lance Morris and Xavier Bartlett. Let's see some of these up-and-coming quicks in the T20 side. Anyway, it is the end of an era for the Australian T20 side, and it's the end of the dream. The triple is over, Damien. For a while there, it looked like Australia was just going to cruise into the knockout stage. The irony is, like, I was backing this team. Like, normally you were. I was backing them.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to bag.
I'm
going to go back to bagging the shit out of them. Maybe they'll do well. All right, we're going to take a break. We're running over. We're going to take a quick break. Then we'll be back to pay tribute to David Warner. You're listening to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I'm Marnus. I'm with Damien Watson, and we've just we've just had a fine look at Australia's World Cup campaign. But at the end of the World Cup, it means also the end of David Warner's career for Australia. And, I think it's fitting that we pay tribute to his career. It's been a stellar one, an exciting one. It's had ups, it's had downs, it's had everything. It's had drama. He's a walking headline, but, he has been epic for Australia. He's the only Aussie to play 100 matches in all formats for Australia. He made 18,995 runs for Australia at international level. He made 49 centuries for Australia in all 3 formats, and he held 224 catches. Damien, an amazing career. How will you remember him?
Well, like a box of chocolates. There was a mixed bag, wasn't it? Or a mixed bag of lollies, because you got everything, didn't you, from David Warner's career. I was there the night he first burst onto the scene, man, as he didn't have a lot of first-class experience. And remember, he had that massive knock where he was hitting 6 after 6 into the Ponsford stand at the MCG against South Africa in early 2009 in that T20 International. I remember
Absolutely.
being there, and that was when he really burst onto the scene and everyone knew his name. And
Mm.
all of a sudden, he was catapulted really into not only national stardom from a cricketing point of view, but also regular selection after that. There was a certain charisma about him. I think it was a certain flamboyance, certain scallywag nature to him. He had a love-hate relationship with the media. I think that mellowed a little bit over time, but I think he'd like to have a few moments again. Remember around that homework gate time in 2013, he had that beef on Twitter with Crash Craddock, who's one of the more respected journalists out there in Australian cricket. And, that probably didn't reflect very well on Warner. And, of course, it's an interesting question. I might pose this to you. Sandpaper Gate, how much does it affect, when we look back retrospectively on his career, how much does it affect his reputation in many ways? Has it dissipated somewhat? Because there was a time there where he was a national pariah.
Yeah, it's a curious question because I think a lot of people, he is such a lightning rod and he does attract a lot of criticism that for many supporters, that will be how he will be remembered. But I think for hardcore cricket fans, there'll be more substance to the way they remember him because he's more than just what happened in that tour of South Africa. But I think unfortunately he and it's so complicated, but he was turned into the attack dog by Darren Lehman leading up into Sandpaper Gate. Australia was trying to find its identity, trying to find the way it wanted to play cricket, and it went back to that old hard-nosed attitude under Steve Waugh. And David Warner could perform. When wound up, he could be that attack dog. He had that fire and that passion in him. And Darren Lehman used that. And then it, ultimately blew up in South Africa under incredibly bad circumstances. And, I think he was unfairly treated. I think the way things happened on that tour need to be looked at very differently to the way most of the Australian public does. And unfortunately, he'll be remembered. What was that?
Was he thrown under the bus?
I think to a certain extent. And I think as well, in hindsight, not enough sympathy was given to what that Australian team went through on that tour of South Africa. I don't know how I'd feel the way David Warner's wife was vilified by the South African crowd. That sort of behavior is just unacceptable. And, if the way he responded was to try and win at all costs, you can hardly blame him. So to answer your question, I think his career is much more than that. And what I remember, Damien, and much like Adam Gilchrist, when Warner was batting early on in his career, and even till the end, it was appointment viewing. You just couldn't miss it because, it was just riveting stuff. And that's the way, I think his career should be remembered. And, he was always like that. But those first few years when he was, just burst onto the scene, you just couldn't miss an inning. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. That's an incredible contribution to Australian cricket to play over 100 matches in all formats. He won 2 World Cups for Australia in the 50-over format, 1 T20 World Cup. He was part of, a number of home Ashes series wins. So, he did it all apart from win overseas in England and India. They were sort of the things missing from his scorecard. But, he did well in South Africa, not the 2018 tour, but the tour before that. He scored a lot of runs and Australia won. So, he was good overseas. He did score 100 in Bangladesh. People think he was just a home track bully, but it's not easy batting on English wickets. So, I think he should be remembered in many ways, but sandpaper shouldn't be the only thing.
Yeah, I think his general demeanour probably turned a lot of people off him, didn't they? I think the public, it's like with anything, if there's a couple of things that draw the ire of the public, the mud does stick, and then the public in general, when even a slight misstep happens, they turn on him, don't they? And I think that's sort of what happened with him. So I think some of it was brought upon him by himself. It's like anything in life, man. Nothing's as good as it seems and nothing's as bad as it seems. Was he as bad as what people made him out to be in regards
Absolutely
to
not. Absolutely not. And he was a hard worker. I mean, you look at how fit he's always been. He's always been he's always been an exemplary professional cricketer, and it's not enough credit is given to him. He's always been an outstanding fielder. As I said, he's always fit, ready to play. After those early indiscretions, he really got his act together. And I do think that, Australian cricket went through some kind of existential debate about how it wanted to play its cricket. And he was caught up in that, we went through a transition as the great players started to really drop off around that 2007 to 2010, just as he was coming onto the scene. And it was, part of that was, do we need to sledge to be a great team? Do we need to be really aggressive? Because that's the way those previous teams had played. And, I think he was caught up in that where, obviously he mirrored what he'd seen before. But as I said, there was, Darren Lehman did, use David Warner to be that attack dog. We need that energy on the field. And, I think now the Australian team plays very, very differently. And, they abandoned that quite a few years ago. They decided they weren't really going to be sledges because it wasn't their personality. And I think David Warner was caught up in that. And, we've seen him, at some stages of his career be called the Reverend because he hardly said a word. So, they're the two extremes. Warner can be nicknamed the Reverend and they'd be called the Bull as well. And that's the complexity of him. And someone who's spent a bit of, a lot of time around New South Wales cricket and speaking to a lot of cricketers that played with him, no one says, a bad word about him. No one says he's a bad guy or anything like that. He's just a bit of a rock star. He's been, very successful for a long time. He's loved in India and other parts of the world. They love watching him bat, and, he's been very successful. And, I think it's a great story in the end. He came from Housing Commission in Maroubra, and now, conquer the world with the bat. Will now have a successful career at franchise level. He'll probably be a successful broadcaster, and he's got a beautiful family. He does stand for a lot of things that Australians admire. So I think there's a lot to like about him.
Yeah, I'll summarise it this way. He was box office. I wouldn't put him in the echelon of, say, Rabin or Ponting necessarily because of that point you mentioned before.
Yeah. As a batsman, I wouldn't put him right at that top either. But as an all-round batter in all formats, he's unique. He's probably the first of his kind. So
he was probably the first to really embrace and perform at all three formats. As all three formats grew, he grew, didn't he?
Absolutely. But yeah, I agree with you. He's not in that top echelon of Australian test batters. But, you look at his one-day record, that's as good as anybody's. I mean, he averaged 45 at one-day level with 2,200s in 159 innings. That's impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's so many layers to his career. I'm sure there'll be a book written at some point as well very soon, Matters.
And I think about some of my great memories of him. So there was that century at the Wacker. I think the last session of the day, against India very early in his career, was opening the batting with Ed Cowan, and he just went ballistic in prime time. So, it set the headlines going, and it was just perfect viewing to see him smash 100 like that. There was a century before lunch against Pakistan at the SCG in 2017.
Triple 100.
The triple 100. I mean, there's so many fantastic memories. There's his consistent World Cup performances. I mean, he's always performed for Australia in the major tournaments. There was the 2013-14 Ashes where he played so well in that series as Australia, looked to regain the Ashes after a long time. So he's had some real high watermark moments.
I'll hark back. My favourite memory, and I'll hark back to what I said at the start of this discussion. Yeah, that innings against South Africa, because barely anyone had heard of him. He burst onto the scene, and people were in awe. Even the South African fans and the players were in awe. And that was when South Africa had that blistering attack. They were at the top of their game around that time. They were very good in the Test series that summer against Australia, and certainly found Australia out on a number of occasions. And for him to stand up to that very, very intimidating attack, we hadn't seen that really all that much that summer. So to me, that's one that stands out. And just the simplicity and freedom in which he played the game at T20 level.
Oh, absolutely. And that was a magic night. I mean, that was, a player announcing himself onto the world stage like
Yeah.
you rarely seen before. He did make some interesting comments to the media in the West Indies during this World Cup. And he did say that coming back since his 12-month ban, I've probably been the only one that's ever copped a lot of flack from whether it's people who don't like the Australian cricket team or don't like me. Okay, it's fine if they want to do that, but I always feel that I've taken a lot of the pressure off the guys as well, I think. And I guess there is this underlying feeling that, as he retires and writes a book, will stuff come out about Sandpaper Gate? Because, he has been the poster boy for Sandpaper Gate. Look, I think Bancroft and Smith have certainly copped it. So I think although he says he's the only one to cop it, like if you look at the way Steve Smith is treated in England, it's all sandpaper as well. So I think, but he's copped it more than anyone because I think there was that preconceived notion before Sandpaper Gate of what he was
Yeah.
like.
And I think he probably rubbed a few
Mm.
people in the media's noses the wrong way. And I don't think that helped his cause in that as well, because we know the media, they have a part to play in the narrative too. I'm not saying they completely control the narrative, but they certainly play a part. And I think there were a few there that probably remembered a few things that he'd done, and maybe that played a part. You're right about Steve Smith. He still copped it in England. I think he got a lot of sympathy in Australia after that press conference. Remember when he broke down in tears? And remember when Warner broke down in tears at his press conference? There wasn't the same sympathy, was there?
No. And then David Warner's due to write a book with Peter Lawler. So I wonder if, I think there is a fear, maybe he does reveal that, say he revealed that Pat Cummins, Josh Hazlewood, Mitchell Starc, they all knew what was going on with the ball. And Pat Cummins is still the Australian captain then. That would send tremors through Australian cricket. But I think the Sandpaper Gate issue is so complicated that the people that only know a bit of the story just know the sandpaper. They don't know the whole war to get the ball to swing, the fact that South Africa were using underhanded tactics as well, the fact that it was an arms race to get the ball to swing the earliest, and basically Warner and Australia just went one little step too far. But I guess if it, so the fast bowlers, what I'm saying is the fast bowlers knew they were trying to get the ball to swing. That is inarguable. You will just, they 100% knew that they were trying to get the ball to swing. Did they know they were using sandpaper? They've said they didn't. But if Warner says, I told Pat Cummins what I was going to do, it'll then be it'll just be it'll be his word against the other guy's word. And look, I don't think Warner will do that because it'll destroy too many relationships. But, the fact is that after Sandpaper Gate, not all the players were interviewed in the inquiry. Most of the team wasn't interviewed. So they never actually asked the team what they knew. But I can tell you the whole team knew they were trying to get the ball to swing. That is just a fact. So,
do you reckon we'll ever know what completely happened, us, the public, or not?
Well, but Damien, I've told you what happened. They were trying to get the ball to swing.
That's the thing.
But there is no different. Like that is the story. It was an arms race to get the ball to swing.
I'm referring to who knew what in regards to the sandpaper. That's what I was
exactly. That's it. That's exactly right. So it's just that little. Okay, who knew how far they were going to go?
Yeah.
But the fact is, they all knew they were doing something, and they knew the Test series was slipping away, and South Africa were doing just as much dodgy stuff as Australia, except the cameras weren't on them; they were on us. So. Look, I'm not trying to defend the Australians. It was incredibly stupid what they did, but this is the smoking gun. So what I'm saying is, if Warner writes in his book, everyone knew we were trying to get the ball to swing. They had some idea that I was in charge, and a lot of them knew what I was doing. Yeah, that will be like a nuclear bomb in the Australian team.
Yeah, with helping sales too. The book sales. Oh, look, He probably isn't bound by them, but yeah, it's just whether, as we know, we don't really know who knew what. So it depends what happens. At the end of the day, he's not bound necessarily by them anymore. So, it's really up to him.
Yes, well, and that is the thing. I mean, if he did do that, I guarantee he wouldn't be at too many of their parties after that. All right, so that's it. A tribute to David Warner. We'll take a quick break in a moment, but let's just wrap up the T20 World Cup. Two things. Firstly, want to talk about the semi-finals. So we've got England versus India and Afghanistan versus South Africa. Who are you tipping, Damien? I think it's the other way around, by the way.
It's an interesting one. Sorry?
So I think they're being played. Afghanistan, South Africa is played first, and then England, India is the second one.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it'd be a great story somewhat, wouldn't it, if Afghanistan were to make it? But I think South Africa at the T20 format, you would think they would have too much class. Having said that, there's always the historical underpinning of what's happened to them in World Cup semi-finals past, Menners, which we can't necessarily ignore, albeit this is a different format. But I still would back the Proteas in. India v England really could go either way. India have been more consistent throughout the tournament. I mean, England were humbled by Australia. They were probably lucky in a way to get as far as they have. If things had gone differently, they might not have necessarily made the this stage of the tournament, the semi-finals. So I'll go with India. It'll be India v South Africa final.
Excellent. I'm with you. I think South Africa will be too good for Afghanistan, and I think we've seen in that game against Bangladesh that the pressure is starting to get to Afghanistan a little bit. And then with India v England, my head says England. I just think they might get the job done, but my heart says India. I really want them to win this game. I do not want to see India in the World Cup final again. England in the World Cup final again. The defending champions. I'm really nervous. I think England are peaking at the right time. And that's what you have to do in these tournaments. And I am a bit concerned. India sort of haven't been pushed in the Super 8. So, I look, going to be a close game. I think that England-India one will be a humdinger to watch. So I'm tipping a England-South Africa final.
Okay,
but I hope it's South Africa, England, India. All right, let's take a quick break, and then we'll be back to wrap it all up with some more cricket news. You're listening to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I'm Marnus. I'm with Damien Watson. We have wrapped up the World Cup. We paid tribute to David Warner. Now it's time to look ahead because the World Cup is behind us. So what's next for Australia, Damien? Well, I will tell you. There's a break now, and then Australia in early September go and play 3 one-day internationals in Scotland, then 3 T20s against England, then 5 ODIs versus England, and then that's sort of September right through to the end of September. And then there's a break in October, and then we start playing the domestic cricket, which is some white ball stuff versus Pakistan, then into the 5 test series against India. So it's some really good series ahead of us. And I think sort of looming all over this is Australia building up for the Champions Trophy in Pakistan next year. So the 50-over team, trying to get that team together. And, then, even longer term is preparing for the home Ashes after that. So, I think the key events for Australia in the next sort of 12 months to 18 months are Test Series versus India, Champions Trophy, and then the home Ashes. But that's what sort of the big picture sort of looks like.
Yeah, I do wonder from an Australian point of view, those one-dayers overseas against Scotland and England will go maybe it might get lost in the wash to a degree, Benners, because it's on during footy finals time, the AFL and the NRL. So I do wonder whether it's going to get a lot of coverage here, to be honest with you, and whether any of the results have any sort of significant scrutiny. I'm not sure. I mean, they would internally, obviously, but I tend to think it's going to get lost in the wash a bit.
Look, I agree, but I think for me personally, I'm going to be yearning for some big time cricket by then after this break that we're about to enter into for the Australian team. But also, it's always got something on the line when you're playing England. And then I do think, obviously, the 50 over side, there's not a lot of matches between now and that Champions Trophy.
True.
Any ICC event, any ICC trophy is, means a lot. And, if Australia were to win that Champions Trophy, they would still have 3 of the 4 major trophies in their cabinet at once. So, although the dream of being the all-format champions gone, that's what's on the horizon. And look, the 3 one-day internationals versus Scotland, I'm sure it's going to look nice on the television. Like there'll be lots of, shots of castles and all that kind of thing. So it'll be a nice escape.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you'd think the Aussies, they wouldn't want the ignominy of losing to Scotland, even though they got close during the World Cup. You'd think they clean sweep that. It could go either way, really, against England, couldn't it, on those particular wickets as well. I think it'll be a good litmus test, as you said, heading into the preparation for the Champions Trophy. I'll back Australia in. I think they'll have a bit of a point to prove, even though it's a different format after the disappointment of their exit from the T20 World Cup. And I'll back them.
Okay, it'll be interesting to see how they go with the captaincy, whether they stick with Cummins in the ODI or they maybe consolidate the captaincy into a white ball skipper for both formats now that we're sort of in a new cycle. I think the end of this T20 World Cup is the end of a pretty significant cycle. Just overall, broadly speaking, I think even the way the contracts have been done with Australian cricket, they sort of end now. So players like Stoinis Nagar actually have come off national contracts. And then some other cricket news. And this is quite a big bit of news. Marnus Labuschagne has been appointed skipper of the Queensland Sheffield Shield side. And, he's had very understated ambitions to be a leader at Test level, but as he rises in seniority in the team, I think we'll hear the drum beats for that get a bit louder. That this is a guy that could be a captain for Australia. I mean, he hasn't put a foot wrong while playing for the country. He's much loved. He loves the game. He's an inspiring character. I mean, why couldn't he be a captain? Why hasn't he been talked about? And if Cummins is going to retire if he's going to retire from the captaincy in the next year or two as he's floated, you'll be looking at Labuschagne and Head as your options, and him being given the job at Queensland, can give him a real opportunity to show the credentials that he might have.
Yeah, I agree. And it's a good squad to play with as well. There's a decent amount of depth in that Queensland squad. So I think it's a good opportunity for him. I think it's a pretty good appointment at the end of the day. Gives him an opportunity to show his wares. And he's a popular player amongst the group. And that's half the battle anyway, to win the respect of your comrades. And he's still somewhat young, really, in the grand scheme of things. So I think it's probably the best way to develop. So I don't mind that appointment. And as you said, he loves his cricket, really does.
And there's no obvious replacement if Pat Cummins were to retire pretty soon. There's no obvious next skipper. There's no one who's, there's no one who's really,
pushing.
Been sort of, been looked at as the next skipper. It's kind of open. There's talk about Travis Head. There's been talk about Alex Carey, but he's drifted out of some of the teams, and so it does become there's an opportunity there. That's what I'm trying to say, Damien. There's an opportunity there for Marnus to show something and to really put down a marker. Speaking of Marnus, listeners, I have to mention this. He took the most sensational catch in the outfield playing in the Vitality T20 Blast for Glamorgan. He was at long on and running around and dived to his right and took the most incredible catch. And, the point was made that he works harder on his fielding than anybody. Like, those catches are not accidents. He's always practicing, and he's maybe, the sort of example you need as a leader.
And a good example for the Australian team. I mean, that was one of the Achilles heels, if you'd like, from that T20 World Cup campaign. So I think if he can instigate a bit of inspiration in the field, that will permeate down to the team. So, I agree with you. And probably, I think he does get the right amount of plaudits for his fielding, but because he's such an accomplished batsman, I know you have variances in form, but sometimes it does get overlooked to a degree. So,
but I think as well, this him being really quirky is kind of overplayed. Marnus is this really quirky kind of guy. He's always doing weird things.
Pretty quirky as well. Steve Smith's
exactly.
a pretty quirky character out on the crease with his mannerisms. So you know what I mean.
Yeah, and like Marnus is very centered. He's quite a he's a man of faith. He's been on this podcast a few times and we've spoken about that. He's quite centered. So I think maybe we shouldn't overlook his leadership possibilities in the future.
And he seems like a calm character, which is what you want from a leader as well. He doesn't seem to get too flustered by pressurized situations.
Yeah, captaincy can change that, though. I mean, I thought the same about Steve Smith, and then he almost blew his top when he was captain. A couple of other bits of news. Unfortunate news, reports are coming out from Victoria that Will Pucovski will not be playing professional cricket next summer. That hasn't been confirmed, but it seems it has been reported on in the major newspapers. So don't feel uncomfortable talking about it. But that would be sad news if that is what is to happen. But I think the right news is because he could come back. There's nothing stopping him. But if medically he's been told that it's too unsafe to keep playing, as sad as it is, you've seen it in football, you've seen it in other codes. It is just the reality, the sad reality of professional sport sometimes.
It is very sad. I've enjoyed his insights when he's been involved, and hopefully he does get involved in the media while he is on a break, albeit we don't know how long it's going to be from the game itself. But just the amount of talent he had, I know, there were questions about his technique at times, but gee, when he was on song, he was very, very good in the longer format of the game. I still remember that Sheffield Shield campaign where in the hub. I know Victoria played less games than a lot of the other teams, but he was absolutely on fire, just scoring runs for fun during that time, and that precipitated his rise into the national team about 4 years ago. So, and there was so much hype, and I think this is the thing, often we talk about the concussions, but also I did somewhat feel for him, and I know it's part and parcel when you come into sporting public life, but there was so much hype, wasn't there, when he was so young and still developing. And sometimes it is hard to adapt to and trying to live up to that promise, which, hadn't been proven yet at domestic level to that point. So, I just can't help but think it might be the right decision, absolutely, but you can't help but think it's a bit of a sad waste of talent. Not that it's the wrong thing to do, but just to the amount of talent he had. It'd be sad to see it go to waste, but as you said, medically, if it's the right call that needs to be made, then that overrides everything. And hopefully he can continue in the media with his commentary because I think he's fantastic. But those were the reports, weren't they? Last week I saw that the Victorian players had almost resigned themselves to the fact that they're not going to see him at least in the immediate future.
That's right, very sad. But, he's got a bag of green. He's got a test half century to his name. But so much promise. Yeah. All right. Let's switch now to the Big Bash because there's been some news and you'll be happy about this, Damien. Tom Curran has left the Sydney Six and has signed with the Melbourne Stars, and that is now under the league's new multi-year contract option. You can sign overseas players for multiple years. They just have to commit to the whole season from the year after next. There's a moratorium on this year. It's sort of grandfathering in the contracts. But Tom Curran, after I sledged him at a media conference before the last Big Bash, he's turned his nose up and left Sydney. I would say that's partly my fault.
You drive him out?
What was that?
You drive him out, did you?
Well, yes, the listeners will know what I said. I played the audio, but he wasn't too happy with me when I suggested if he knew how the batting crease worked. Anyway, look, we don't need to relitigate that moment. But in the wake of that incident, he's left the Sydney Sixers. Sam Billings, though, was signed from the Brisbane Heat to the Sydney Thunder. So Sydney has lost a POM and gained a POM, although different teams. And I do think that initiative by Cricket Australia is really good to allow clubs to sign on multi-year deals as long as they commit to the whole season, because there will be a lot of players that want security, want to be able to plan their lives for the next few years, and spending summer in Australia is a very attractive prospect. And as the money's competitive with other leagues, albeit the other leagues can pay a bit more, it's still for certainty and lifestyle, some players will choose that. And then staying with the Big Bash, Marcus Stoinis was on the Cricket Australia podcast, and he said that he wanted to skipper the Melbourne Stars. And I think the Melbourne Stars would be crazy not to make him the captain. He's a genuine superstar in T20 cricket. He plays in the IPL. Australia and the Big Bash is desperate for its biggest players to be here. If he wants to be a leader, I would make him the skipper, because then he'll be more invested in the tournament. He'll promote it more, less chance of him jumping ship to another league. I think absolutely take advantage of his enthusiasm for the role.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, they've had some very good serviceable skippers over the time. I know the Stars haven't been great. Neither of the Melbourne teams have been overly great, have they, in recent times? So if he wants to do it and he gets the support ultimately, and I think he has skippered one match in the past. So I think that's right, back last year. And those Zampa has sort of taken over the mantle along with Maxwell at certain stages as well. But if they're happy for him to take the role, I'd be supportive of that as well. And I think most people would be. As long as you get what I'm saying.
Do you get what I'm saying, though? Do you get what I'm saying, though? Like, he's a big name. If he's saying he wants to do it, like, bloody do it. Like, what?
Yeah,
like,
but you got to have some support within the camp. That's all I'm saying. And if it's there, absolutely.
I'm sure they love Stoin.
Yeah, exactly. Just as long as they're happy with his leadership capabilities. Even if you like a person, doesn't necessarily make them a great leader. But as you said, the enthusiasm is what counts. So, yep,
exactly. All right, listeners, now we're going to get into Can't Let It Go. That was all the cricket headlines. And listeners, now that the World Cup is over, we'll just get back to regular weekly episodes of Cricket Unfiltered. Although the international team's on a break, there's going to be a lot of cricket to talk about. There's always lots of issues to cover. So Cricket Unfiltered will be back every week. But let's get into Can't Let It Go. Damien, what's your Can't Let It Go this week? I've left it for you. It's the biggest Can't Let It Go in world cricket.
The Amazon deal, Marnus. Obviously,
yes.
I'm sort of torn as to, and I think it is the way of the future, but I can't let it go as to whether it was necessarily from an Australian point of view the right move not to have it on free-to-air. I think it still grabbed a lot of people's attention, but probably not to the same attention as previous World Cup campaigns because there was no free-to-air coverage of it. I think obviously the time zone doesn't help, does it? I mean, when it's in the middle of the night. Although, the Bangladesh v Afghanistan game that was being played out, the drama of it was being played out at a reasonable time for us because it went so late locally. But I don't know, and we've seen this in England, the effect of not having cricket on free-to-air. And it might be the way of the future, but I'm sure there's been some...
I think it was a very muted response to this World Cup. Definitely. I mean, it's hard to tell because Australia didn't. No, it's hard to tell because Australia also didn't get to the semi-finals or the final.
True.
Maybe we make those knockout games. We play a final against England or something. But I think definitely a combination of the football codes going on, this being the first major men's event on Amazon Prime, and the fact that Australia really didn't get going. And I spoke to a lot of casual fans, and although I enjoy Australian play in Namibia and Oman, they look at that as being a walk. They just don't look at it as being proper cricket. They're like, oh, when are we playing the real teams? And that's not me saying that. That's just the casual fans saying that. So and I wouldn't be surprised if Amazon are mortified that Australia aren't in the semi-finals because, I think it would have been pretty low. And then I think aspects of the coverage could get a bit better. There's nothing played in the rain breaks or anything. It's just a holding screen.
That's right. And I think wasn't there a lot of complaints about the fact there was no real update on the screen either during the rain breaks?
Yes, you had to go to quick
no
info.
one really knew what the situation was and things like that. And I think maybe just the amount of World Cups that we have plays a part as well. Does the novelty get taken out of it? I mean, I remember the 2003 World Cup. We played Namibia in the 2003 World Cup, and even that garnered a bit more attention, I remember, at the time, because you didn't often have a World Cup all that often. So maybe that plays a part as well, the proliferation of World Cup tournaments.
I don't even think that, though. I do think, people for a lot of people, they had to go out and seek Amazon Prime, and it just wasn't compelling enough. For the hardcore cricket fans, they would have. But that's a good one. I think it's a real challenge to educate people. But I think Amazon Prime is one of the most popular streaming
It
apps. So
is.
I think there's
Yeah.
potential there. There's millions of subscribers in
You'd rather
Australia.
that than Paramount Minutes, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually think there's more subscribers to Prime than there is to KO, for example. But the thing about KO is they're all sports fans and they
Correct.
all use it and they all just go there expecting the sport.
Correct.
So it's different. All right. My can't let it go is, well, I got two. Well, I'm just going to go with two quick ones. Rashid Khan throwing his bat at a teammate when they were running between the wickets in the Afghanistan v Bangladesh game. They took one. They're coming back for two. His teammate sent Rashid Khan back and he just threw his bat in anger at his own teammate. Never seen that before. But then everyone's still talking about it when Gulbuddin Naib went down at first slip like he was shot in the back of the leg to waste some time. And although as funny as it is, I think there actually should be some sanction. Like you can't openly flaunt the laws like that. I don't think he should be banned for a game, but I think he should, be fined. I think he should have some demerit points. But that's where I'm at it. Like I think it's not a huge hangable offense, but it's pretty bad.
It's the same debate in the tennis, isn't it? When the momentum's against a player and they, accentuate an injury or accentuate, some sort of soreness that they may have. Yelena Ostapenko being a prime example. And that obviously creates issues in regards to integrity to a certain degree. But I don't know, there might be an argument the other way, though, Menas, where a lot of the English cricket fans were saying, well, suffering your jocks, Aussies, because you went against the spirit of cricket, even though you played within the rules and you cried about it. And then when it goes the other way against you, you have a different point of view. I think there is a difference between the two. I'm obviously referencing the Alex Carey Bairstow run out executed by Alex Carey because
they're not similar at all. They're not similar at all.
Correct. Because at the end of the day, it was within the rules. And yes, if a player is injured, it does, they have the right to delay it. We saw it with Ranatunga all those years ago as well when he needed a runner. But at the same time, it was pretty clear that he wasn't really injured, right?
You had Trot waving save some time. So, look, I think it's one of the more enduring memories of this World Cup, but I think it deserves some sanction. Don't think he should be barred from playing the next game. I don't think he should be, banned from the game or anything. It's not a heinous crime.
In the game, I reckon. Some sort of team sanction in the game where, their run rate drops or something like that.
Well, I think he should just pay a fine, demerit points, and then the ICC can put out a statement. Gulbuddin Naib has been fined 50% of his match fee and lost 4 demerit points. So players know that that's not on. But it was an extraordinary afternoon watching that Afghanistan-Bangladesh game. It's exhausting. One of the more incredible things I've ever seen, and that was just one part of it.
And Rashid Khan wasn't happy with Naib either. We heard the commentators go off, but also Rashid Khan was very aggressive either. He was pretty intense in saying, get the hell up off the ground.
Absolutely. So it was just too obvious. It was nothing subtle about it. Great acting, but in the end, it'll be
very good acting at all.
No, I think
it's type of acting that.
It'll be a moment we never, ever, ever forget. All right, Damien, we've gone far too long, so thanks for joining me on Cricket Unfiltered. Where can the listeners find you?
If you want to see my Twitter page, at Damo_Watts.
Great to have you on the show again. Listeners, thanks for tuning in. You can find me on Twitter at @Amenas. Please like and subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. Leave us a review. We'll be back with regular weekly shows. No more match reviews. So enjoy the rest of the T20 World Cup. I'll be watching, and I just hope anybody wins but the Poms.